Today, we're going to be covering the complete history of Titanus Doug, the grinning Monsterverse lizard who took the world by storm. And following that, I'm going to finally review the most recent Monsterverse film, Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. Yes, that's right, students. It's a double creature feature. Let's get things started. So, right off the bat, you may be wondering why I'm covering everyone's favorite Hollow Earth lizard again, since I looked at him already back in this YouTube short. Well, as I said in the short, Godzilla vs. Kong director Adam Wingard once mentioned that Doug would return to the Monsterverse if a sequel to GVK was ever produced. And in case you haven't heard, there is indeed a sequel now, one we'll be reviewing shortly. And Doug is in that movie, which means I now have an excuse to discuss the adorable Titan again. So let's return to the beginning of the story, and go into even more depth this time. Godzilla vs. Kong gave us a look at a whole new area of the Earth that prior Monsterverse films had been teasing, namely a giant environment deep inside our planet called the Hollow Earth. As with Skull Island, the creators behind the Monsterverse decided to provide this new location with a selection of otherworldly superspecies, and concept art began to be created, including pictures of a really fierce-looking four-legged lizard. Whether this guy was in the script, written by these guys, or whether he was dreamed up by director Adam Wingard or one of the artists, I don't know. But all of these people began working on a design for a Hollow Earth lizard. Wingard reportedly specifically requested that this creature look similar to Godzilla, and thus all these designs featured spikes much like Godzilla's dorsal fins. Eventually, the team began to move toward a chubbier, much less menacing look for the creature, and in the end, this is basically the design they went with. They chose just the perfect one, it turns out, because this, at that point, unnamed creature would end up making a huge impression and going viral, despite only appearing for about 4 seconds in the finished movie. That was it. That's his in-universe history for the movie. He just appeared from the right side of the screen after Kong ran by and snagged a type of giant crab called a rock claw in his jaws, shook it, and grinned. But that was all it took for the fandom to fall in love with the dog-like 75-foot lizard. In my opinion, the true history of Titanus Doug began in the time following the release of Godzilla vs. Kong. The lizard became a legend among fans of the film, and was dubbed Doug by a podcast called It Came From a Monster Movie.
My name is Doug.
The name stuck, and eventually, even director Adam Wingard began referring to the creature as Doug, and called on fans to push for Legendary to officially provide the monster with this name. In this post, which I think was from April of 2021, just a month after GVK came out, then, 1 month later, Legendary put out this Titanus Doug, note the name, appreciation post. The Titan was on the move, and it seemed Doug really was to be his name, especially when merch like this shirt came out with the title right there on the front. The monster's species remains mostly unknown, though it seems safe to assume he is at least somewhat related to Titanus Gojira, based on Adam Wingard's request that he look like him. He was once referred to as a Phytodon by an HBO Max audio description of Godzilla vs. Kong, which is interesting because that's the name of a creature from Peter Jackson's King Kong from 2005. However, Doug hasn't been called this again since, so this may not be his official species anymore, if it ever was. Some have speculated that Doug is in fact Godzilla's son, or that perhaps he's actually a juvenile relative of the enormous creature whose bones Kong and Tsuko walked across in Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. Fun theories, to be sure, though I don't personally think a monster named Doug will ever be allowed to be that important to the series. But anyway, speaking of the New Empire, let's cover Doug's role in this film next. In that post by Adam Wingard we mentioned earlier, he stated that if he ever made another Godzilla film, Doug would be coming back, saying the monster had a lot more to give, and pointing out that since they'd only used his CGI model for one shot, they still needed to get their money's worth out of it. Later, after Godzilla Kong: The New Empire was announced and info about the movie began to be revealed, a very promising sign that Doug would come back appeared, namely Playmates figures of the monster. However, this wasn't complete confirmation he would be in the film. After all, the Godzilla vs. Kong toy line featured behemoth figures, and the Mammoth Titan never showed up in that movie. But then, I finally got proof that he would be in the movie. And where did I get that proof, you ask? From a leak? From a tweet by the director? No. I just went to go see the movie, and I saw him with my own eyes. And here's what I saw. Time for another bite-sized serving of in-universe history. After Kong was able to scare off the pack of wart dogs that chased him at the beginning of the film by breaking one of them in two, he decided to snack on the wart dog he'd ripped up, but upon taking a bite, winced in pain due to a toothache. While distracted by this, Titanus Doug saw his opportunity to rush in and take the meal for himself. Kong noticed the robbery and got into a tug-of-war with Doug over the meat, but then became distracted again, this time by a loud roar that sounded like his own. Kong ended up letting the lizard keep the prize as he began looking into what was making the noise. So I guess Doug kind of beat Kong. That's a big deal. Also, he was able to basically double his screen time compared to last time, coming in at around 8 seconds. May not seem like much, but if he can keep doubling his screen time like this for each appearance, he'll have a whole movie to himself 10 films from now. And that's the history of Doug so far, but I have a feeling it may just be getting started. As a matter of fact, this October he'll be getting a whole story to himself in the Monsterverse Declassified graphic novel, which could reveal a bunch more details about our favorite little buddy. Who knows, perhaps it'll even give me an excuse to talk about Doug in yet another video. Aside from Monsterverse Declassified, Doug's other minor appearances include appearing as a cave painting in 2 Call of Duty games in the limited-time Monsterverse crossover event, as well as in a different game called Lords Mobile. He also appeared in the novelizations for both GVK and GXK, and the former featured some other members of his species joining him in the Rock Claw Feast. Let's wrap up this Doug-focused portion of the video by looking at merchandise featuring the monster. These are the 2 pieces of Doug merch I have in my personal collection, namely the Playmates Doug and Suko figure set, and the shirt I mentioned earlier, which I was given for my birthday this year. I'm also interested in eventually picking up the Playmates Doug packaged on his own. Aside from these items, a Doug figural bag clip also exists, as well as a plushie that was given away to those who backed this Legends of the Monsterverse graphic novel collection on Kickstarter. Monsterverse Declassified backers can also apparently get some Doug merch, namely this pin. There are also several Terra Virtua NFTs of this guy too, and the descriptions for these provide us with a few extra details about this guy, such as his ability to whack foes with his tail, and his scales protecting him like armor. And that completes part 1 of this class, the Doug Kaiju bio. But we're nowhere near done. Now we can get into my Godzilla Kong the New Empire official review. I can finally reveal to you what I thought of the movie. But first, I suppose we'd better leave this mini Kaiju bio classroom and move to the normal one since we're done looking at Doug.
What? We have to get up and traverse all the way down the hallway to the classroom with the tan wall? I don't have the energy to do that.
Yeah, here's a better idea. How about Pencil Leopard and me go to the paint store?
Oh, and get stuff to decorate this room and make it look like the other one. Oh, yeah, that's smart thinking, Kashimu-kun. The paint store's only a few miles from here.
Hold on, kids. Have you thought about...
Okay, let's get going, Pencil Leopard.
No, wait, kids.
What?
You've overlooked something important with this plan of yours.
Really? What?
Well, you shouldn't walk all the way to the paint store without picking up some of their great candy near the checkout counter. Here's a couple bucks to get candied rock claws for the whole class.
Oh, yeah,
Woo!
sweet. Thanks, Professor.
You're welcome. See you later.
Bye.
Those kids are so smart. Anyway, let's begin the GXK review. Please keep in mind, this is a spoiler-full review, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, prepare to have a lot about it given away. Also, these are all just my personal opinions, so feel free to disagree with me about the stuff I'm about to say. Okay, I'm going to roll the GXK slideshow and start giving you my thoughts now. Here we go! Godzilla Kong the New Empire is a crazy movie, and that craziness both works in its favor and also holds it back a little. People have compared the film to Showa-era Godzilla outings, and to a certain extent, rightfully so. Scenes where Godzilla performs a suplex on Kong, or where Kong hurls the Scar King at Godzilla and the monster whacks him with his tail like a baseball, feels like they could have been pulled straight out of a Godzilla vs. Gigan or Godzilla vs. Megalon screenplay. Anything that felt like this, I loved, being a big fan of Showa-era kaiju stuff. Maybe you've guessed this by looking at my kaiju bio catalog. It's almost all monsters that originated in the Showa era. However, there's a chunk of other monster scenes in this movie that, while others may lump them in as also feeling very Showa-y, to me just don't capture that same feel. And surprise, surprise, I thus like these scenes less. I'm talking especially about the scenes completely centered around the Monkeyverse. Now, the Showa era eventually reached a point where the monsters did some pretty human-like stuff, but I think the Monsterverse is taking that idea a bit too far with these monkeys. They use knives and axes, they have their own monkey society, they show compassion toward each other, they sit on thrones, they act as guards, they show all sorts of emotions and laugh at each other, they even somehow have managed to chain a monster with chains made out of bones. But at least they can't talk to humans. Oh no, wait, they can with sign language. Yeah, this movie gave all these monkeys a huge amount of focus, and their extreme intelligence, combined with the Hollow Earth setting in which everything is huge and you lose all sense of scale, really made me feel like I was no longer watching a movie about giant monsters when they were on screen. Felt more like The Jungle Book or something. Overall, that's kind of a problem I have with Hollow Earth in general, as a matter of fact. It just doesn't really feel much like a monster movie when we're down there. Also, some of the creatures in this location seem very CGI-ish to me as well. However, I think the Hollow Earth does match a lot more with the kind of adventure on a mysterious island feel you get from King Kong films, so I do think it works well as Kong's home turf in the Monsterverse. But as a Godzilla fan, I'd definitely like to spend a lot less time in the Hollow Earth in the next movie. But speaking of Godzilla, let's discuss him. The King of the Monsters, who was pretty OP in this story, stole the show whenever he appeared on screen in this film, which sadly wasn't too often. His fight with Scylla in Rome at the beginning of the movie is probably my favorite part of the entire film. The way he just absolutely demolishes the spider while heart-pounding music plays, and then it cuts to the title of the film, this scene gives me goosebumps. From around this point to the time when Kong and the team of humans journey back down to Hollow Earth might be the chunk of the film I like the best, because of all the world building it does, not to mention the Easter eggs, and the portion of the world I care the most about. Not the Hollow Earth, which to me doesn't feel very real, but the surface world, where, most of us actually live. When I watched the film the first time, this was the part of the movie where I started to think GXK might surpass my expectations I had for it. We got to see Bernie doing a podcast and advertising Gargantua insurance, like War of the Gargantuas maybe, which immediately made me think of the Kaiju insurance episode of Ultraman Blazar that aired a few months before the movie. And we got to see Dr. Andrews trying to keep the US government happy about the current state of things in regards to the Titans, and a Titan vet pulling out Kong's tooth. To me, this was cool stuff. Then, however, after the return to Hollow Earth, things kind of went back to what I expected based on the trailers for most of the rest of the movie. It turned into a monkeyverse adventure in the center of the Earth, with Godzilla nearly completely out of the picture for the time being. Don't get me wrong, there was still a lot of cool stuff and fun to be had down there, but as I mentioned before, the Hollow Earth doesn't really feel very monster movie-ish. I also had to really suspend my disbelief when the humans got to the Iwi territory, even beyond what I already had to with Hollow Earth itself. However, things went back to, ooh, this is fun, when Kong fought Godzilla in Egypt. Then, part 1 of the climax against Scar King and Shimo, where they were all floating around in the air, again didn't feel like I was watching a monster movie, but more of a cartoon. A fun cartoon, though. And then part 2 in Brazil was better, but probably too short. If you haven't noticed, there's a pattern with me. I like stuff on the surface of Earth where you can actually tell how big the monsters are and the stakes are higher, because that's where we live. And the Hollow Earth stuff is just not as much my cup of tea, though it's still fun. Let's talk about the characters, both humans and the main Titans. We discussed Godzilla already, but now let's look at his evolved form. It exists. He really doesn't feel like he does anything much different in this form. To me, it comes across as a palette swap, which I know it isn't in-universe, but the movie makes it feel like it is. They probably should have designed this form to look a bit more distinct and given him a few new powers. Next is Kong. I actually like Kong a lot in this movie, now that I think about it. This might be my favorite outing for him in the Monsterverse so far. Him having human-like compassion toward his fellow apes felt a little weird to me, but otherwise it was fun to watch him fight, particularly when he used Tsuko as a weapon, of course. His beast glove was also a fun addition. Next is Scar King. I think they did pretty well with this villainous ape's personality. However, his actual role in the movie and the way it plays out kind of made him not feel very threatening to me. I mean, he basically loses his first fight against Kong and is only able to turn things around because he's got Shimo. Also, much like Mechagodzilla in the previous film, he gets unleashed into the real world much too late in the story to ever feel very threatening. He can't even completely destroy one city before the heroic monsters totally obliterate him. Plus, with Godzilla feeling so overpowered in this film, there was never really a time it felt like Scar King had a chance. If he and Shimo made it to the surface much earlier in the film, and maybe he successfully destroyed Rio and then got away with a captive Tsuko or something, and we got a lot more focus on how impacted humanity and the Titans were by this, that could have done a lot for the King of Scars. But it turns out that the Playmates toy descriptions were wrong, and he wasn't really that unstoppable after all. So far, King Ghidorah and the Mutos are the only monsters so far in this series that, to me anyway, have actually felt incredibly threatening to our planet. And the fact that they were already impacting the world in big ways long before the movie was coming to an end helped a lot with that. Also with Scar King, I still don't understand exactly why he, acts the way he does, when the Great Apes are supposed to be the guardians of humanity. I feel like some backstory into his motives would have gone a long way to make him more compelling. Shimo. She's good. Probably the most Godzilla-ish new monster, appearance and abilities-wise, to come out of the Monsterverse so far. Interested to see what they do with her in any movies that follow. Mothra returned in this movie, and to me her return kind of felt off. For example, it's barely even acknowledged that a monster that died in a previous movie in this same timeline is now just back, and her scene where she initially appears feels very rushed and doesn't really make much sense to me. Why did Gia specifically need to wake her up? How did she reappear? I am aware of the fact that Legendary didn't know whether they were going to be allowed to use Mothra in the movie, and it could have been a different Titan called Phosphora instead, and I'm sure that's the main reason this feels weird, but since the plan was reportedly to use Mothra if possible from the beginning, I definitely think they could have worked her in better. I'm glad she was chosen over Phosphora though, because it makes way more sense to have Mothra, who we already know is his ally, calm Godzilla down in Egypt than a new monster we've never heard of. But I do think they could have brought the Moth Titan back in a way that made much more sense, simply by having the Mothra egg mentioned in the credits for King of the Monsters hatch. Also, side note, but I really wish they had brought Mothra's song by Bear McCreary from Godzilla King of the Monsters back for this movie, not to mention Godzilla's theme from the same film. Just those two music tracks alone from Godzilla's past are a huge reason KOTM is one of my favorite Godzilla films of all time, and I think they really would have boosted my score for this movie too. I do like the theme used in the opening for GXK pretty well too, as I alluded to when I discussed Godzilla's battle with Scylla, but I really want to see the return of classic Godzilla music in upcoming projects, that's for sure. Oops, I almost forgot Tsuko. He's not my favorite. I look at him and again don't feel like I'm watching a monster movie, but instead maybe a Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong film or something. I'm curious if at some point he will end up replacing Kong like Godzilla Jr. did for Heisei Godzilla. If Kong keeps aging at the rate he has been, Tsuko's day as the new King Kong may be fast approaching. Now for the humans. I don't think the acting was awful. I think the dialogue definitely could have been better though. I think Gia was probably the best human in the movie, but she has some competition. Trapper was the main new human character, and I liked him a lot in this movie as well. His unusually energetic personality was fun to watch. I still feel weird about how he acted after Mikhail died though. That was strange. It was nice to have Bernie back too. Sometimes his dialogue, along with Dr. Andrews, seemed a bit unrealistically wordy, but otherwise he provided some nice comic relief during some of the Hollow Earth scenes I would have probably been less interested in otherwise. As for Dr. Andrews, as I mentioned, some of her dialogue sounded weird, but she was overall good in this film as well, especially when interacting with Gia. Just a few more things to discuss before I make my final assessment. First, I want to bring up the fight scenes again, just to say, they're fun, especially the ones in real-life locations. Some of the rest may be a little too over-the-top for me, being a fan of films that utilize actual suits to portray monsters, but just from an action perspective, it's fun. As far as the overall story, it's not hard to find plot holes, but I don't think we're expected to take it very seriously anyway. Some structural issues I have are that the ending of GXK moves too quickly, going from Egypt to Hollow Earth to Brazil in rapid succession, and I think it ends too quickly as well. Also, I still don't know why they opted not to have an after-credits scene. Would have been nice to have an extra something to speculate about. As we reach the end, I kind of feel concerned about mostly coming across as negative, because the truth is, I really liked this film. It's a Godzilla movie after all, and I'm very pleased to see it's been performing well. That being said, as a member of Team Titanus Gojira, I'm definitely ready to move on from Hollow Earth and Kong and return to following the adventures of the King of the Monsters, which Adam Wingard indicated was going to be what would happen in the next film. so I hope that still applies even though he's not returning to direct it. I'm honestly kind of sad he's leaving, because even though GVK and GXK weren't my favorite Monsterverse movies, I know this guy really had a love for Showa-era Godzilla, and based on what he did do with Godzilla in the 2 Monsterverse films he directed, I think he would have made a really fun Goji-focused film. He just sadly only made films with Kong as the main Titan. We'll have to see who ends up taking his place. To finish, I'm going to give Godzilla Kong the New Empire a 5 out of 10 for its plot, a 6 out of 10 for its use of monsters, and a 3.5 out of 5 for special effects and visuals. Oh, and 15 quadzillion out of 10 for use of Doug. But what did you guys think of the movie? Looking forward to hearing from you in the comments. Also, please like and subscribe for more Kaiju content, and check out all the Toku Professor merchandise I'm offering on Teespring. Your support is greatly appreciated. The shirts, mugs, etc. I have available would be a great birthday gift idea for fans of the channel.
How'd we do, Professor?
The classroom is now a sight to behold.
Yep. It definitely is that. Oh boy. See you next time, everyone.